Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Healing Outside the Box. My name is Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. Today, I'm bringing you part 2 of What are sell-by dates and why should we care? Now, if you'd like to go back and listen to part 1 to get a feel of what I'm talking about, I'll leave a link in the show notes. But you could always just go to my homepage on my website, Healing Outside the Box, and click recent episodes. To just sum it up for you, I basically discussed, first of all, the fact that my memoir is now out in audiobook format on Audible and iTunes. I still have a few promo codes left for the US, and I've got 25 promo codes for Great Britain. So if you'd like a link to the free audiobook, you can just message me in the comments section. Or if you want a more private spot to drop your email, you could go to my contact page, which is on my website, Healing Outside the Box. You could also DM me on Instagram if you like. So if you send over your email, I will give you a free audiobook until I run out of promo codes. And of course, if you'd like to write a review, I won't stop you. Okay, so in part 1, I talked about how foodborne illness is usually categorized by organisms that cause spoilage and organisms that cause disease. Also, there are many ways to naturally preserve food, like drying or salting, adding acid, adding beneficial bacteria, which drop the pH and outgrow the bad guys. You've got irradiation, which nobody likes to talk about, and of course, heating. I started going through the basic types of foods and how they are usually preserved. I started with meat, poultry, and fish. Then I went through the cheese and other dairy and eggs. I also made a note that the microwave, which kills bacteria by non-ionizing radiation, is not safe for dense foods because the germ-killing heat only penetrates about 2 inches into the food. So you can make foods hot, but not necessarily safe. In the last episode, I talked about meat, chicken, and fish in general terms, but I forgot to talk about cold cuts. Cold cuts can be a problem. Because they are usually sliced in advance, there is much more surface area for those pesky bacteria to grow on. Most of the bacteria we generally talk about with foodborne illness need oxygen to grow, so they like the surface of meats. And that's true about spoilage and pathogenic bacteria. They're called aerobic bacteria, and that would be opposed to anaerobic bacteria, which grow without the presence of oxygen, and they can be a problem in canned goods. So with cold cuts, even if they're sliced in front of you, they should be placed in the coldest part of your refrigerator, which is usually in the back, maybe 3 or 4 days tops. Okay, now today I'm going to continue by talking about sell-by dates on condiments. Now, by law, all condiments need to have a sell-by date, or sometimes they say use-by date, which really should be what we're talking about. It defines an arbitrary date when a product's quality may start to deteriorate. And most manufacturers are optimistic when they stamp those dates. The date will not always take into account that conditions are sometimes uncontrollable. We just had a summer with record-breaking high temperatures, and it was very humid in many parts of the country. Keep in mind that food usually moves in stainless steel trucks, which are good heat conductors, and that food is exposed to the warm air during all transfers in and out of stores. Food is clearly going to deteriorate faster in the summer. And of course, manufacturers want to sell rather than ditch that product, so they're going to err on the side of being generous with that date. So above all, if it smells weird, has an off color, or is growing mold, toss it. I know you think you're being frugal when you cut off the mold, but in my humble opinion, you might be taking a risk. You're free to disagree, of course, but you might agree once you get sick that perhaps it wasn't worth the risk. The rule of thumb is generally to refrigerate after opening, but even with that, condiments, generally speaking, won't last as long as we'd like to think they do. In many cases, the refrigerator is to retain flavor and avoid mold, with some exceptions. 2 general words of advice here. Use a clean spoon or knife when scooping into the jar. You could fall prey to food poisoning if that utensil is dirty with, say, tuna fish and you're dipping it into, say, mayonnaise. Also, if it says it lasts for years, it's probably got lots of preservatives in it. For example, conventional peanut butters made with hydrogenated oils and preservatives may be okay before it's opened, but refrigerating after opening helps to minimize oil separation and spoilage. Now, on the flip side, if you'd like to go more natural, something like freshly ground peanut butter at Whole Foods will spoil faster because there is nothing but peanuts in it. So their peanut butter will go rancid, but it's healthier and tastier than the conventional. So it's your choice. Now, who regulates this? With minor exceptions, the USDA and FDA are involved in regulating food safety issues. They issue food storage rules, inspect for adherence to food safety guidelines, publish a grading system, and set up standard of identity laws for many foods. I'll give you a link to the USDA website for preservation of foods and the FDA website on nutrition labels and sell-by dates. Now, for condiments, let's talk about mayonnaise and salad dressing. The answer to how long you can keep it around is, well, it depends. We instinctively refrigerate mayonnaise straight from the market, but that's not always necessary. It is absolutely necessary once the jar is opened, though. When it comes to mayonnaise, there is something called a standard of identity defined by the FDA. It states what should be included and excluded for a product to be officially called mayonnaise. That is to limit something called food adulteration. It's not exactly what drug cartels do to their pure cocaine to increase profits, but the idea is the same. Products we refer to as creamy this or creamy that generally have milk solids added, but when the milk solids get emulsified into a liquid and put in the product, it makes it yummy for both spoilage and pathogenic bacteria. The Hellmann's people say their mayonnaise will be good for about 2 months refrigerated after opening. I imagine most people are bound to push that limit. The creamier, milder products will go faster, even in the refrigerator. Acidic ingredients, such as vinegar and lemon juice, will inhibit bacterial growth, but these products will eventually fall prey to yeast and mold, as well as bacteria, if not handled properly. Homemade mayo should always be refrigerated and will only last a few days. Obviously, it has no chemical preservatives. Now, when it comes to salad dressing, it gets personal with me. This is personal because I worked for R&D at Lipton in their wishbone salad dressing department, so I know how the sausage is made, so to speak, and it's not pretty. There are 2 types of salad dressings, and they have different rules. There's the vinaigrette dressings and the creamy dressings. Homemade salad dressings will only last 3 to 4 days in the fridge, again because there are no preservatives. But the commercial vinaigrette dressings, if stored properly in the fridge, can last up to 4 to 6 months. The creamy salad dressings, especially the light creamy dressings, are milder, contain dairy ingredients, and more water if it's the light version. On the other hand, They also contain preservatives and a lot of salt. Miracle Whip falls into the category of creamy salad dressing by its standard of identity. These creamy light dressings should be only good for about 2 to 3 months in the refrigerator because of the dairy ingredients in the water content. These products create an environment for yeast and mold to grow, even in the fridge. Now, ketchup and mustard. If ketchup is refrigerated, it could last 5 to 6 months in the fridge, so it's relatively safe. Part of that is because there's a lot of salt in there that protects it, and tomatoes are pretty acidic. Mustard contains a decent amount of vinegar and no dairy products or eggs, so it's fairly safe for a while. But I usually refrigerate mine after opening to preserve the flavor. Now, salsa. Salsa should definitely be refrigerated after opening and will keep for only about 2 weeks because it's not acidic enough to keep from spoiling. It's usually mold that will get to it, but it's not a good idea to eat that kind of mold. So, next, we have chili sauce and fish sauce. There's too much salt and acid to attract pathogenic bacteria, but refrigerating after opening will preserve the flavor. These are items that people often believe will last forever, but if it's a food, it should eventually spoil. Now, what about vinegar itself? Well, vinegar is at least 4% acid. Not much of anything will grow in that, but it can slowly change in color and taste over time. You can just store it in a cool, dark cabinet. Next, we have jams and jellies. Even though these usually contain preservatives and a lot of sugar, they will eventually spoil at room temperature. It's almost always a mold, but a yeast is also possible. So refrigerate after opening and pay attention to the sell-by dates, which should be use-by dates. Next, we have honey. Honey is usually stored at room temperature, whether it is natural or manufactured, but it won't last longer than a year. That's pretty much the condiments. Now for bread, crackers, and the like, they're usually too dry and salty for harmful bacteria, but they'll last longer in a cool, dark place. Just watch for mold. When it comes to canned goods, I have one major point. Never eat any canned food where the can is swollen, misshapen, or dented. Makers of canned goods are generally careful to heat their canned goods to super high temperatures, but botulism is always a risk. The bacteria that produces botulism contains a potent neurotoxin that is usually fatal, so you don't want to mess with a swollen can. Okay, now cooking oils. All cooking oils have a shelf life, but they vary according to the type of oil and the conditions under which it is stored. It doesn't last as long as people think, and it can eventually pick up a sour smell. If it does, definitely toss it. At Wishbone, we were working with soybean oil, and I remember them saying it will start to turn after only 1 week. I was even shocked to hear that. In general, the more polyunsaturated the oil is, the faster it will spoil. But this is spoilage bacteria and possibly yeast, not pathogenic bacteria. So the oils with a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acids, like safflower or soybean oil, will spoil faster than olive oil or, say, peanut oil. It will keep the longest in a cool, dark place, so you can always refrigerate any of your oils. If you are someone who can't stand to throw out foods unless they are empty, you may want to store them all in your fridge. Sesame oil goes rancid the fastest, and pork fat or lard will take years to go bad. It is 100% solid fat, and the fat is mostly saturated. The same is true with beef tallow. Butter is 80% fat, 20% moisture, so that will eventually go rancid. As for nuts and seeds, they will also eventually go rancid, so pay close attention to the sell-by dates. or use-by dates. If there's any question, say more spoilage happening in the summer months, smell the jar of nuts carefully. If you don't smell anything, eat one nut and pay attention to how it tastes. If it tastes off in any way, you'll need to throw it out. You may have heard something about nuts being contaminated occasionally with aflatoxin. Aflatoxin in peanuts is a rare but fairly serious byproduct of a mold contamination. American peanuts are screened for aflatoxin, but if you're in an African country or just see nuts that are moldy, discolored, or shriveled, throw them out immediately. I know that it's hard to hear, but it needs to be said. If you're upset and need to calm yourself down, I find that 20 minutes of cat videos usually does the trick for me. Then I can just sniff and toss. Sniff and toss. I'm going to stop here because I could go on and on. I know I didn't get to desserts and beverages, but I just wanted to get to the major food groups. If you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to put a question or comment on my website contact page, which is Healing Outside the Box, or in the comments section in the show notes. I also have social media things, as most of us do. You can contact me on Instagram. My name, Jean Tiberio, is my name. I'm not that creative, I guess. On Facebook, you can reach me by typing in Healing Outside the Box. And on Twitter, you can type in jet ski or Healing Outside the Box. That's all I have for you today. Be well and stay tuned for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.